Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. Today on the bench I have the cheapest guitar that I have ever had on the bench before. This is a First Act M1972. It's a single humbucker, single pot, hardtail, bare bones guitar that I picked up from a thrift store, and we're going to take this video in two parts. First of all, we're going to tear this thing down and see what it's made of, and then second, we're going to throw a couple of parts at it and see if we can't make it into something of a decent guitar. So first impressions are that it seems like a fairly decent little guitar. I mean, none of the hardware seems overly cheap. It does have the pretty standard Asian tuners that you find on a lot of Squiers, especially the bullets. The humbucker looks weird to me. It does have adjustable pole pieces, but I'm not sure if they're fake because they're all turned the same way. It's got this weird pattern on the top, so it doesn't have two separate bobbins. It's got a chromed plastic knob on it. It's got really thin strap buttons. And it's got kind of an odd setup on the headstock up here. The tuners are sort of like what you would expect to see on an Ernie Ball guitar, where there's 4 on one side and 2 on the other. But it's kind of the opposite of Ernie Ball's typical setup, because in this case, there's 2 on the left and 4 on the right instead of the other way around. That's going to make for an interesting upgrade. And even though it is a hardtail, it's not stringed through the body. The strings end up at the back of the bridge. In terms of the neck, it's got a 22 fret neck. It looks like it's probably a standard Strat neck pocket because it does have an overhang for the 22nd fret. It's got a plastic nut. I think you probably already knew that. But the fret job itself, I don't hate. It really does not have any sharp fret ends. The frets are kind of a small to medium wire. I can already tell it's going to have a couple of high spots because I've been playing around with the fret rocker before the video started. But it's got a decent maple neck with a rosewood board. A pretty thin, kind of a shallow C profile to the neck, and I really don't know what else to say about it. It's got kind of a basic black paint job. This one's got a couple dings on it, but what do you expect for less than 20 bucks? And believe me, I know that sounds cheap, but you could probably pick these things up all day for that. This one is a 2010 model. I don't know how long they made this model, but First Act has a ton of different models, and I'd venture to say there's plenty more that you can pick up in this price range. I'll just give you a quick look at the back here. The neck does have a scarf joint. There's no skunk stripe. It's got a standard bolt-on style neck, kind of like a Fender. And it has kind of a Fender-like body contour here, as well as on the front. And then a football jack plate down here. And I guess that's really all there is to say about it. Let's get a quick reading on the humbucker while we're at it. Looks like the humbucker clocks in at 8.7K. You know, this guitar happens to be missing a string, and it's kind of funny to think that by the time I put strings on this thing, I'm probably going to double its value. But what are some of the other upgrades I could do to this thing for not much money? A better pot would be less than 10 bucks. A knob, a couple of strap buttons. Those things are all really cheap. Even the tuners aren't that expensive. And I could definitely replace the nut, so I'll probably do that. I already talked about the strings, and there's not much else that I could do to this thing except for electronics. And that's where things get a little bit tricky. There's a lot of different parts that I could throw at this thing, including a Fleor humbucker for not much money. But I think I'll probably treat this thing to something a little bit nicer, and that's one of the Fender Player humbuckers that I just removed from that HSH guitar that I reviewed not long ago. That being said, there's a couple things that I'm still curious about on this guitar, like what is this body made out of? Now it's also worth noting before I start any upgrades, I want to go ahead and check out all the functionality. And I did actually check out the pickup and the wiring, although if that's all going to get replaced, it's kind of moot. But it does work. The tuners mostly work, but they're going to go. One of them is missing a screw anyway. But the biggest thing I was worried about was neck relief. And this thing does have an appropriate amount of neck relief already. It could probably stand a little bit of tightening of the truss rod, but that won't be a problem. But with all that said, I do want to check out one other thing, and that's what is this body constructed of? Because while these upgrades don't cost all that much money, I'd kind of hate to throw good parts into a plywood guitar, even though it wouldn't be the end of the world. But with that said, let's go ahead and take off the back control plate and see if we can tell from there. Well, I'm not going to be able to tell from here. Inside here is just as much black paint as everywhere else. It does not look like it's shielded, although it does have a shielded cavity cover, so that's a little bit of a mystery. I'll probably test that out. But I guess let's go ahead and try the neck pocket and see if we see bare wood there. Well, it's not the cleanest neck pocket in the world in terms of the paint job and everything else, but I'm happy to report that it is solid wood. Kind of hard to tell what kind of wood it is, and I'm not really a wood expert, but it looks like it might be poplar or something similar. but I'll be sure to get a good tight photo of what it looks like so you guys who know better can tell me. There are a couple of finish cracks around the neck pocket. That's to be expected. I'll probably chase those with some super glue, but I don't think there's really much that needs to be done about them. My impression of the body is that it's kind of heavy, but we'll know better when we get it on the scale. So on the scale, the body clocks in just a bit under 5.5 pounds, about 5.4. And the neck clocks in at 1.8, and I'm sure there's some miscellaneous stuff in there. So let's just call the whole thing about 7.25 pounds. It's really not a heavy guitar overall, and I'm kind of surprised by that. It just feels a little bit heavy, and maybe that's because it's mostly concentrated on this body here. All right, I think the next thing I want to do is start the upgrades. So let's remove a few parts and do some repairs to where the tuners need to go. Now I'm just going to do my standard repair, which is to fill each one of these holes with some dowel rods or basically toothpicks. It's not a completely necessary step if you were to skip it, but since I'm going to be using enclosed tuners, there are way too many holes on the back of the headstock and it's just not very attractive. And also it's possible that one of those holes could be in a location that I need to mount another tuner, so I might as well go ahead and fill them. I do this all the time and you guys have seen me do it 100 times, so we'll just breeze through it right now. That's pretty much it. So off camera, I'll wipe off the excess glue and we'll wait for them to dry, score them, and snap them off. Also, very quickly, I know I'm going to use a larger CTS size pot, so I'm going to go ahead and drill this out to a 3/8 hole. I like to use a step drill bit for this because it helps me center my hole, and also I like to tape the hole so it doesn't chip out the finish. I'm also going to go ahead and clean up the hole from the back side because that makes the pot fit a lot better. All that does is remove any chips or burrs that might be in the back there. When I said I'd have to complete this project in 2 parts, I didn't think that would be literally, but unfortunately I've run out of time to finish this episode and I've got some family in town. So here are some of the parts we're going to be installing next time. I've got a set of D'Addario end pins, which are the football shaped end pins that are sort of a compromise between a locking set and a normal set. I've got a Fender player humbucker. That's one that I removed from the HSH player and it happens to be the neck pickup, but we're going to make that work. I've got a 450K pot from the same guitar, as well as a single knob, so we're going to do a little bit of an upgrade in the electronics all across the board. And I'm going to add a switchcraft jack, a treble bleed circuit, and a couple of switches to do series parallel switching and coil tapping. I've also got a new truss rod cover and a new neck plate. And for tuners, I've got a set of Geiger Professional 1:21 ratio tuners. Now, of course, they don't make those in a 4+2 set or a 2+4 set. So what I've done is combined 2 different sets of tuners and created my own. On top of that, next time I'll do some repairs to the fretboard on this thing because there's a couple of dents that need to be steamed out. We'll also replace the nut with a bone nut. I'm refinishing the headstock. We also need to drill the headstock to accept modern style tuners instead of the open style vintage size tuners. And there is one part that I don't actually have here yet, and that's a humbucker ring. This is the original humbucker ring, and I don't know if it's obvious in the camera, but it's a little bit oval shaped on the inside, which makes it look weird with a smaller humbucker than what came with this thing originally. So I'm waiting on that to arrive, but it'll be here well in time for the episode next week. At any rate, my apologies for not getting the whole episode done this week. We'll get it done next week, I promise, and at least you have something to look forward to. The First Act is actually a much better platform to build upon than I originally thought, and I'm really pleased about that. If you all like these kind of videos, including teardowns and modification projects, please be sure to subscribe to my channel. I appreciate all the likes and all the comments. If you want to support me, check out my Amazon or eBay links in the description. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you guys next time.